Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the final series today for the Victory Road World Cup of VGC. My name is still Stefan, hasn't changed in the last two games, but back with me is Maeve for the second time, and I'm very excited to get into this final match with you. It's going to be great.
I'm very excited. I do want to say the consistency of the commentators' luck, especially in last game, was very funny to me. We spoke a little bit about this off stream, off mic, but just the comment of the crit and then having just like three critical hits right after that. It's just I think the impressive irony just never ceases to amaze. This has been a really interesting weekend of commentary, especially after having a couple of weeks in a row where I just kept getting really quick 2-0s. So I'm loving the amount of Pokemon we've gotten to commentate, and I'm loving how absolutely insane it's been. I have absolutely no regrets.
And of course, we wouldn't be privy to any of this insanity if it wasn't for our three wonderful sponsors. So a big shout out to Elgato, GG Tour, and Metafee, who are making this possible. But we've seen a couple of matches happen today, 4 so far. A couple of them have mattered a lot. A couple of them have mattered a little bit less. But overall, it's been really, really fascinating. You know, we started things off with that Poland versus Taiwan match. Taiwan has closed out that series 7-1, which is honestly an incredible result given how strong and dominant Poland has been this entire tournament up until this week. And then, you know, the UK and Ecuador managed to, they finished their adventures as well. They've tied 4-4 after the Jack Clark versus Galo Orbea match. Both of those teams have been eliminated, unfortunately. And then over on the third match, Pandelis for Australia taking out Kenneth de Jesus in one of the weirdest sets of VGC that I've ever seen. But that has effectively made it so that France will advance with Australia from that group. China probably out, barring an act of God. So wild results there as well. And then, of course, we did see the Netherlands versus Vietnam match just now. Tomas Wojcik versus Ni Dong, which puts Netherlands at a 4-2 record, which might be enough to see them through to the next round, depending on the results of the other match. They'll really want to have one more just to at least guarantee the 6 points. But for them, even 6 points isn't enough to guarantee a spot in the next round, because there's a good possibility that South Korea, Mexico, and Netherlands will be three-way tied on 6 points. So the Netherlands will really be wanting to close this out 6-2 if possible.
Yeah, I think it's all about differential at that point. It is just one of those things where we already had a three-way tie in the last stage of the competition. There's a chance we have another one, but we still have one more match to go today, and that is between Agustín Marinucci and Rafa Busutil. Again, we are kind of closing out this day. We had our first match and our last match are both from the same groups, but it is really exciting for us to have both Spain and Uruguay. Even though both of these teams are currently out, it is, of course, really exciting to be able to watch teams from Spain, who was our defending champions from last year, undefeated. However, you know, it's at this point, groups have changed. You get put in a different circumstance, especially thanks to these pairings and drawings. But I still, you know, I think it's going to be really interesting to kind of see for both of these teams how they end up doing in this kind of last hurrah of a match for this weekend. Currently 2-0 from Spain over Uruguay at the moment. And if you see down there what Ramses Quintana has already run and won with, you have a pretty good idea as to what we may be seeing later in just a few minutes.
What a wild matchup that one is as well. You look at Ramses Quintana's team and you see, oh wow, an Alolan Executor and a Hydreigon. That's weird. He's running Calyrex Ice and Ogre. That's not a common pairing. And then you look on the other side and you see a Riolu and an Araquanid. So I kind of am sad that we didn't get to see that one. But we have a really, really interesting set of teams for this upcoming match as well. As Maeve alluded to, Rafa will be running the same 6 as Ramses Quintana did there. So we're going to get to see that Alolan Executor and the Hydreigon in action potentially. Hopefully at least one of them. I really do feel like I'm going to feel a little bit scammed if we just see the other 4 Pokemon in all of the game.
Oh, I absolutely agree. It's one of my favorite VGC events for World Cup is when we're all like sitting here and we're like crossing our fingers that we'll get to see the weird Pokemon, and it doesn't come out game 1 or game 2, but then they bring it game 3, and it's a very rewarding kind of feeling. There's a lot of satisfaction to it, I think, both for us as commentators and for viewers as well. However, you know, we don't have too many results recorded for either of these teams, but As for both of these players, there's definitely some results for both of them kind of moving forward, and taking a look kind of back at both their records for this year and in the past as well, both in the World Cup of 2021 and before then. Rafa Busutil, Rafa, has a ton of really, really great results. EU Internationals top 64 this year, World Cup competitor both this year and last year, along with Agustín Marinucci, also a World Cup competitor last year. But for Rafa, 2021 Players' Cup EU qualifier top 16 and Players' Cup finals top 12 in 2021. So both success in the online and the offline era in the past 2 years.
Yeah, and those are some really impressive online results. We do have some players who are more comfortable offline than online, some players that are more comfortable online than offline. Rafa seems to be very at home playing online. Those two Players' Cups results are very, very impressive. And of course, it's going to be a great opportunity for him to show us that online strength. Agustín, on the other hand, a World Cup competitor last year around, didn't quite have the most impressive win rate last year, but he's done a little bit better for himself this year. So it would be really, really nice for him to get a win over a player as well regarded as Rafa here, to end their adventure in this 2022 World Cup, and to maybe put their name in the hat for next year's World Cup team as well.
Yeah, and I mean for Uruguay, right? This is their first time making it into groups. So I think any sort of improvement as well is always really nice for a team kind of coming together. But looking at teams, specifically the teams that these team players are running, Agustín is running Zacian, Kyogre, Incineroar, Amoonguss, Porygon 2, and Landorus. And this feels kind of like one of these things is not like the others, Sesame Street rhyme, whereas for Rafa Busutil, he has the Incineroar, Kyogre, Calyrex Ice, Indeedee, Hydreigon, and Alolan Exeggutor.
Yeah, this is what looks to be a very specially focused team from Rafa outside of the Calyrex Ice Rider, which is not great for Agustín's double Intimidate team, especially when one of those Intimidators can't really come into the Calyrex Ice mode. I would be very surprised if we saw that the Landorus at all. But overall, Agustín has a really interesting team here. Swordfish, probably the most common archetype, but this is a very different approach to it. These are all Pokemon that we see with different variations of Swordfish, except for really the Porygon 2, but we don't really see them together, right? Like Incin and Amoonguss, like there's a couple variations that Incin and Amoonguss are kind of interchangeable. You don't really see them on the same team that often. Landorus can slot in sometimes, but this is a very interesting full team from Agustín, and I'm interested to see what the game plan really is for it.
We are seeing right out of the gate the Porygon 2 and the Kyogre and the Indeedee and the Alolan Exeggutor. I think the thing that's really interesting, right, is Alolan Exeggutor wants to click Trick Room. Porygon 2 could click Trick Room and reverse it, because you can't really go and do too many priority things with the Indeedee on the field, but it does give you the option, showing Psychic Seed here as well, the item on that Alolan Exeggutor.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting way to play this out. Giving it a special defense boost is going to make it a little bit harder to remove. Of course, any ice move would probably just remove it from the field, but Kyogre doesn't tend to carry Blizzard. It tends to carry Ice Beam, and that's what the Indeedee is there for, to just make sure that you're not going to be taking an Ice Beam to the face, or to the 3 faces if you're that Exeggutor. So, looks like we're seeing Sleep Powder coming out turn 1 here. I do like that, because like you said, clicking Trick Room, you risk the Porygon also counter Trick Rooming and maybe losing a bit of pressure to the Kyogre just clicking a Water Spout into you. Overall, though, this is an interesting lead that on paper I think tends to favor Rafa.
Yeah, and I mean at this point too, right? You may be in a little bit of a different position, but instead, Follow Me is going to be the move from Indeedee, trying to once again, like you said, get some ice type moves out of the way, but instead a Water Spout is enough to bring that Indeedee down to 6 HP, does a little bit of damage onto that Exeggutor, not very effective. Porygon 2, though, actually going for the foul play, able to knock that Indeedee out off of the field, would be a great time then to possibly Dynamax that Kyogre, go for a Max Hailstorm, or even just a regular old Ice Beam, but instead a Sleep Powder is going to stop any plans to that. Going to put this big beast of Kyogre, which has a move that could do a lot of damage onto a couple of different Pokemon on this team, out of commission.
That is a Choice Specs Kyogre that we're seeing on our screen, Maeve. That is a very interesting way to play this. Not sure what the... I imagine it's probably running a very low speed investment, just because you're running that Trick Room team, and Kyogre has that base speed that can run both fast and slow. Make use of both sort of sets, but the Kyogre is going to be the choice here, coming on in. There is the potential for Foul Play to do some damage to it, weakening a potential Water Spout. Porygon 2's non-stab Foul Play on a special attacker isn't really going to be that scary.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at this point as well, right? If you do have a choice specs Kyogre and you are running it a little bit slower, then now may be the time to click that Trick Room. But once again, you're in the mind game of if you click Trick Room, does the opponent click Trick Room and cancel your Trick Room, knowing that you may want to click it? So having these two Trick Room users on the field kind of feel like they're faking each other out. But Water Spout from Rafa's actually ends up going first here instead. Does get the knockout onto that Porygon 2 thanks to those choice specs, and does a pretty decent chunk of damage as well onto the Kyogre on the opposite side, and that Kyogre is going to be taking that guaranteed turn of sleep this turn. Executor, though, showing off Wood Hammer is a move of choice here. It does enough to knock out that Kyogre as well, getting two pretty interesting threats off of the field for Rafa, and taking a pretty decent amount of recoil damage as well.
That was actually a lot of very surprising things happening there. So first of all, the Ogre is faster on Rafa's side. I thought it was going to be a min-speed Ogre, or at least a no-investment Ogre, because you're running this pretty heavily Trick Room-centric team, but it is actually quite fast with those choice specs, so that's kind of interesting. Wood Hammer being revealed on the Alolan Executor, showing, okay, you know what, I'm going to be running a physical set on this Eggy, which I think, I'm going to double-check right now so that I'm not wrong, but I think that's primarily a special attacker. Yeah, it is, so interesting to reveal that it is, in fact, going to be physical on this set. And I did talk about earlier how it looked like Rafa's team was fundamentally focused on the special side of things, but with a physical Alolan Executor, that's really not that true anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, it gives kind of the fear, right? If you now know that it's that physical, it may not be running something like Energy Ball, so now you have to pay attention for a much stronger grass type attack, especially if Agustín was expecting something like a special Alolan Executor. Not that that's something you would truly prep for any Series 12 matchup, and if you did, I would be genuinely stunned. However, though, going to be a Dynamaxed Kyogre out of the gate for Rafa's side of the field. At least at this point, too, choice specs won't be making as much of a difference thanks to now being in Dynamax and having the opportunity to choose your moves instead of being locked into something like that Water Spout. But Agustín also matching a Dynamax here, and that's going to have to be that Incineroar, I believe, if I am not mistaken. And a Max Flare could actually be really nice here.
Yeah, this is going to be pretty interesting. On the other hand, while you do lose the choice specs boost for the Kyogre, you don't really need it in the rain because you do have 150 base special attack, and then also, you know, Water Spout's 150 base power. Like, this is going to kind of delete whatever it clicks into, including a Dynamaxed Incineroar. So no Max Flare to speak of. That's going to go down. It looked like Play Rough did hit into the, I think it was Play Rough that hit into the Kyogre, doing quite a bit of damage, but still nowhere near enough to remove that Dynamaxed Whale from play. Trick Room comes up as well, and that's going to be it for game number one. There's really no way for Agustín to get out of here. A quadruple Protect gets him out of Trick Room, but the amount of damage that he's going to be taking through Protect makes it that even if he did manage to land 4 Protects in a row, I really don't think he's going to be able to clutch out the game anyway.
Yeah, and even if he does deal with those 4 Protects in a row, if he would still have to fight through the full HP Calyrex Ice that we know is hiding in the back, but Agustín has not been able to confirm. So, you know, I think at that point, right, when you move into game 2, I almost feel like bringing the Porygon 2, which was an interesting sort of psych-out Pokemon, it really, I don't think, did as much as you may have needed it to, and you may need to bring something that can put out a little bit more pressure in the next few turns, especially with that Indeedee lead, right? The foul play was nice because it got the Indeedee off the field, but even with the Indeedee off the field, the Kyogre just came in and was an absolute menace.
I'm really surprised that Choice Specs Kyogre picked up the Porygon 2. Like, Choice Specs is a very good item, but Porygon 2 is very bulky. It usually carries that Eviolite, and I was just checking it right now because I'm curious, but like the standard Porygon 2 set shouldn't be able to die to that. So that looks like it's a pretty physically bulky Porygon 2. Maybe not even invested in the special defense at all. So a bit of an unfortunate turn of events there for the Porygon 2, just kind of getting deleted, but it managed to make that game 1 very one-sided.
Yeah, and I mean, at that point too, right, you almost want to wonder, knowing, of course, that the Alolan Executor has Sleep Powder, if there's anything that you could bring in turn 1 to maybe stop that. If you go for something, you can't really lead the Incineroar because of the threat of Indeedee, right? So then you don't really have the opportunity to go for something. If that Incineroar is running Taunt, then you may have the opportunity to do so. However, no Incineroar lead this time, going to be the Zacian and the Kyogre, that double restricted lead, and then Kyogre and Indeedee. So Alolan Executor staying off of the field this turn 1 in case it may be in the back. We are unsure.
All right. Now, one side of this is, of course, the fact that we know that the Kyogre on Rafa's side is faster, or at least speed-tied with that of Agustín. So even if there was a Water Spout fired off by Agustín to potentially weaken the Water Spout on Rafa's side, it's not going to go off first, unless it is a speed tie and he gets a little bit lucky. So the Indeedee allowing the Kyogre to apply a lot of pressure here just with that follow me. You can go into the Indeedee with the Zacian and remove the Indeedee, but you're going to trade a Zacian for an Indeedee in that case. And is that really worth it?
Is it really? I mean, honestly, that's kind of where you have to be, right? Unless the Zacian wants to switch out into something that may be able to kind of tank this a little bit more. But honestly, what on Agustín's team is going to tank a Water Spout in the rain from a Choice Specs Kyogre? Because Incineroar is not going to want to switch into it. It took all of that HP, all that damage from the Max Geyser. But a Dynamax Kyogre here on Agustín's side, no threat of something like a Sleep Powder this turn, is at least a way to kind of deal with possibly the Pokemon on the other side of the field. Maybe change the weather if you think it's a speed tie and you can get a little bit luckier on that side. Or even just try and put out some extra chip damage. You could even, if there is a fear of the Alolan Executor in the back and you have something like that Max Lightning, you can maybe try and change the terrain from the Psychic terrain and allow you to have a little bit better options. However, Substitute is the move of choice on the Zacian, which is something I really like here. Indeedee going for that Follow Me, but not going to have to worry too much. There is a Water Spout from the Kyogre, does not do too much onto the opposing Dynamax Kyogre, and breaks the Substitute on that Zacian. However, there is going to be a Max Geyser from the Kyogre on Agustín's side, targeting into that Indeedee, who went for the Follow Me, and that brings it down to its Focus Sash, so just hanging on with 1 HP, even thanks to that critical hit.
That's a really unfortunate turn for Agustín. The Indeedee holding that Focus Sash there, gonna force the Kyogre into a spot where either you burn 2 turns of Dynamax to remove the Indeedee, or you use the Zacian and you lose the Zacian anyway. So a really unfortunate spot there for Agustín. We do confirm the Assault Vest on Agustín's Kyogre there as well. That was just not a lot of damage from that Water Spout. So definitely going to be Assault Vest. And that's also information that could come in handy for Rafa going forward, especially if it goes into a Game 3. Being able to identify, okay, there's no Protect on that Kyogre. I can use that to my advantage.
Yeah, that's the perfect time for Hammer Executor, right? Protect, though, from this Zacian coming out on this turn. Just trying to take a little bit less damage here. Indeedee, though, once again, just going for Follow Me, just being a menace with that last bit of HP on the field. However, the Kyogre going for that Water Spout, not going to hit into the Zacian through that Protect. Does hit the Kyogre on the opposite side, once again doing very little damage. Another Max Geyser here as well, going to target into that 1 HP Indeedee. And like you said, you are burning through those 2 turns of Dynamax that are so important. Rafa hasn't felt the need to Dynamax yet, and quite honestly, that makes quite a lot of sense, because there really isn't much of a need to do so when you really have, you know, a really strong Pokemon, but you can stall out their turns and then get your Dynamax up later, especially if you're trying to do something like set up a Trick Room with a Alolan Executor and allow your Calyrex to come in later. And even as you continue to do more chip damage, if you don't get the knockout onto this Kyogre, if you do enough chip damage, you can allow your Calyrex to come in and get a pretty quick Chilling Neigh boost if you're able to do so.
Well, with the Assault Vest, we know that there's probably less of an offensive investment into this opposing Kyogre. So one of the questions here becomes, will the Executor with the +1 special defense boost be able to survive a Max Hailstorm? Because if it is, it does give you kind of a free Water Spout Trick Room turn, because either you get Trick Room and they focus down the Kyogre and then your Calyrex comes in and is able to sweep the game, theoretically, or they target down the Executor and allow your Kyogre to just fire off a Water Spout, removing the Zacian, which then, again, paves the way for potentially a Dynamax on the Calyrex, even if there isn't Trick Room to support it. So, an interesting turn here for Rafa. There's a lot of pressure on him to pick the right move here. Agustín has 1 more turn of Dynamax, and it might just be the turn that he needs in order to swing the momentum a little bit more in his favor.
Yeah, and this would be the time to show something like that Max Hailstorm, especially with a Pokemon that is 4 times weak to it. Amoonguss coming in, though, on Agustín's side is a pick I actually really, really like here instead of possibly something like that Porygon 2. Can apply a lot of pressure with things like Rage Powder or even Spore on the opposite side of the field. Calyrex, though, switches in here for that Alolan Executor, and that is at least maybe going to try and draw the threat of some other max move that was targeting into that slot, maybe fearing something like Trick Room or Sleep Powder. However, Kyogre going to be the Pokemon to Dynamax here on Rafa's side. It still has so much HP. I don't even know if it's taken really any hits, so it's got a lot of pressure putting on here. It's going to be a tank to try and deal with. even, you know, if it's not holding something like the Assault Vest, just being in that Dynamax HP and going for another Max Geyser this turn, just consistently putting out pressure, Amoonguss will still take a ton of damage, well over 50% of its HP on a not very effective move, and then a Max Hailstorm from the Kyogre on Augustine's side into the Calyrex. That Calyrex is a great switch in, and although the weather has changed here, I don't think Rafa was too upset about it.
Yeah, that looked like the entire thing was planned out there. You know, bringing in the Alolan Executor just to switch back out seems like the entire purpose is to eat that Max Hailstorm, bait the final Max move into doing pretty much nothing. And that's a really good play by Rafa. He did an exceptional job to be able to manage that. And from here, you can just pick up the Amoonguss with Glacial Lance pretty much whenever. But in this case, it's going to be Max Lightning into the Kyogre from Rafa, which will, of course, neuter the opportunity for Spore in Trick Room anyway. So the Amoonguss goes for Protect here, potentially reading an Ice move from either of the Pokemon. But that's going to allow the Maxi Tormenta to go into the Kyogre. That's going to dish out a lot of damage. Not quite enough to KO it, but still enough to bring it right to the brink, which will allow a potential secondary Chilling Neigh boost if that Calyrex can pick up both with the Glacial Lance.
Yeah, absolutely. Going to be an Origin Pulse, does connect on both of these Pokemon here. Glacial Lance, though, actually, Trick Room is going to be the move here, and you might not even get that pickup of the knockout there because of this Hail. If that Kyogre just has just a little bit of enough HP to get knocked out, it does hang on. I couldn't remember exactly how close it was, but I knew it was pretty close. But like you said, this Trick Room plus possibly a double Chilling Neigh boost from this Calyrex is just going to, I think, really lock up the end game for Rafa.
Yeah, this is going to be very, very scary because you still have the threat of a Max Hails or a Max Geyser coming out of the Kyogre, so you're not really comfortable to switch anything in. Like, yeah, sure, okay, Zacian resists a Glacial Lance. It doesn't resist a Max Geyser, so it's going to be really, really tough here for Agustín to maneuver past this. Kyogre, of course, doesn't have the opportunity to protect anyway, so that slot is gone. Like, whatever switches into that slot is just going to go down. I think we also saw the Max Geyser target into that slot. The Amoonguss could maybe buy another turn by going for Pollen Puff here to try to... I mean, it's healing up the Kyogre. I don't think that's going to be enough. It'll probably take the Glacial Lance, so it'll be one less Chilling Neigh, I guess. It's a little bit of something, but here comes the Glacial Lance. That's going to be the end of this little mushroom's life. And, you know, even with Assault Vest, Dynamax Max Geyser is going to dish out a lot to this Kyogre.
Yeah, like you said, Amoonguss is now off of the field, and a Chilling Neigh boost for this Calyrex. I think if you're Agustín, right, you have to assume that only one Chilling Neigh boost is better than two, and just allowing possibly for a critical hit if you're hoping for one with the Kyogre and an Origin Pulse. However, another Max Geyser right into this Kyogre slot is going to most likely be enough to pick up that knockout. Actually, it doesn't. It is able to hang on, and the weather has changed, so now you're not getting knocked out from that damage. So that was actually a really huge Pollen Puff, and the fact that there was no critical hit or knockout on that Calyrex Ice is massive.
Yeah, that is a big deal. I mean, it's still going to go down to another Glacial Lance here, but still, you managed to keep that Kyogre alive. You stall out an extra turn of Trick Room, and the Porygon 2 is going to be able to pick up the Calyrex here very easily with Foul Play, potentially. But, again, you're still in a position where... Actually, the Kyogre is locked into Water Spout still, so it has to switch out now because it's a little bit concerned about taking damage and not being able to do more damage on the other side of the field. So, a bit of an interesting spot here all of a sudden. The Porygon 2 applying quite a lot of pressure. Alolan Executor is going to come right on in. But, I mean, the Kyogre should go down. But this is another situation where maybe you can actually switch it out. Oh, yeah, that's actually slower!
That is slower, right? Yeah, the Porygon 2 running slower than this Calyrex here. This Calyrex, not entirely sure how fast it's running, but slower than the Porygon 2. So the Porygon 2 able to get that knockout without taking a Glacial Lance and Max Lightning here. Or, sorry, a Thunder from the Kyogre into the Executor. Doesn't do too much damage, but it does consistently show the threat that you have a Thunder that you can target into with the Kyogre on the other side of the field. It is electric terrain, and it is raining, so it is a good time to click it.
Yeah, that's actually kind of wild that the Porygon 2 is slower than the Calyrex Ice Rider. Min Speed Porygon, of course, does not move first in Trick Room if both are Min Speed. So that, in turn, shows that the Calyrex Ice Rider is not Brave Nature. Maybe it's Adamant. Some people do tend to run Adamant. But still, wow. All of a sudden, Agustín is very much alive in this game.
Yeah, the Woodhammer, though, is going to get rid of this Kyogre off of the field, saying, it is time, you have hung out for far too long. It is going to allow for this Porygon, though, to get this turn up. It is going to go for the Eerie Impulse into the Kyogre on the opposite side of the field, dropping that special attack by 2 stages, which is pretty helpful when you are facing off against something like a Choice Specs, but an Origin Pulse connecting is still going to do a really nice chunk of damage, thanks to the rain. Is enough to get the knockout there, and one hit with a critical hit. I was wondering if that was it. That critical hit enough to get that Porygon off of the field, negating the effect of that Eerie Impulse. And that is really, what a crazy kind of endgame that we've walked ourselves into. Zacian being the last Pokemon here. Trick Room is running out, and you are getting pretty close to the end of it, and I wonder if your main priority is to get rid of this Executor, possibly stop any sort of kind of weird shenanigans and just hope for Origin Pulse misses.
One turn of Trick Room. Zacian can go for a very free Protect. It's a weird one. Agustín definitely would have had the game if that crit didn't happen just there. At least potentially. You know, there's still another opportunity for one more crit. But overall, that crit, massive for Rafa here to keep him alive in this game. The Zacian should just go for a very free Protect here, stall out this last turn of Trick Room. Generally speaking, the position you want to be in against an opposing Zacian is 2v1 because there's no spread moves. It's pretty easy usually to close out the game against a single Zacian with 2 Pokemon. But we have an Eerie Impulsed Kyogre that's slower, so the Zacian might just be able to KO it first, and an Executor that can't really hit it very well. So we do have the opportunity for Sleep Powder with the electric terrain going away, but I think it's very, very crucial that the Kyogre not go down here.
Yeah, right. I think that's if you prioritize going for something like a Play Rough into that Alolan Executor just to prevent the threat of Sleep Powder. But then, of course, both of these Pokemon are going for moves that are not fully 100% accurate. Not by choice, right? I'm sure this Kyogre would have much loved to have clicked something like Thunder, maybe, or even Water. But instead, you know, that Play Rough is enough to knock the Alolan Executor out. But, you know, if a Water Spout may have felt a little bit nicer to click. But Origin Pulse does connect, and if there is another crit for Rafa, could be a pretty nice spot. Thanks to that Eerie Impulse, though, the Zacian is able to hang on, and that is absolutely huge, as Agustín has managed to snatch back what was possibly a really, really good, but then, like, a really close endgame, but then not close, but then close again.
90%, Maeve. Is it gonna miss? No, okay. Flare Up hits. Kyogre goes down. It is enough damage, and Agustín ties it up. What a wild game number 2. That Trick Room interaction really not going the way that I think Rafa expected it to. Porygon underspeeding, that was really weird. But then even the crit keeping the game alive, that was a wild game number 2. I'm all for game number 3. That still gives us one more chance to maybe see that Hydreigon on the field.
I would love to see it. I almost wonder if the threat of ice from that Kyogre is, you know, enough to stave off the Hydreigon. And, you know, even the Calyrex Ice is something that, you know, having the Calyrex Ice next to the Hydreigon, maybe just trying to consistently switch it out, like we saw with the Alolan Executor, baiting that Max Hailstorm. I think it would be sick. I think this whole day of Pokemon has been absolutely crazy, and if this is a lead up to anything like what the World Championships is going to be in just a few days, I would love to see. I mean, it's fun for us, right? You can't imagine being these players, how frustrating it can be. I mean, I'm sure you have a better idea than I, just as you have more experience playing at this kind of level. However, you know, if we get these kind of entertaining matches just as we head into World Championships next weekend, I am thrilled. I am excited. My heart is pounding a little bit. And Kyogre Zacian is going to be the lead for Agustín for Game 3. And for Game 3, it will be Kyogre Indeedee. So kind of going back to those Indeedee roots a little bit more, maybe trying to just protect from this Zacian on the opposite side of the field.
Yeah, I do kind of stand by what I said at the last game, that the first 2 turns were pretty good for Rafa. Like, trading 2 turns of your opponent's Dynamax for an Indeedee is pretty fine. I think things started to go off the rails a little bit when he clicked Trick Room, and then the Calyrex just wasn't the slowest thing on the field. I think that's really kind of where things started to get weird. You know, that's information that Rafa has now. He doesn't play the exact same way. But I do feel like maybe going for the same first 2 turns is a pretty decent way to do this. But it looks like he's actually clicking Helping Hand?
Yeah, maybe going to Helping Hand, trying to possibly get a Water Spout off quick enough to do enough damage. Protection from the Zacian. Protect from the Zacian means that at least this turn you're not going to be taking any sort of Behemoth Blade damage. Kyogre going actually for a Thunder this turn is what it has chosen to lock itself in with. And even though you have the Helping Hand, it is not enough to get that knockout. Origin Pulse is the move of choice, though, for Augustine's Kyogre. Does connect onto both of the Pokemon on the opposite side of the field. Does not bring the Indeedee down to the Focus Sash, but that is enough for possibly something like a 2-hit KO. And now this Kyogre, it needs to Dynamax if it wants to not use Thunder again.
Yeah, Dynamaxing should still allow it to pick up the Zacian. I mean, it does kind of depend on how bulky the Zacian is. Some incredibly bulky Zacian sets can survive a no Mystic Water, no Life Orb Max Geyser, or at least make it a roll sometimes. But overall, that Assault Vest keeping Augustine's Kyogre alive. I'm wondering if Rafa expected that to KO. He definitely knows that it's an Assault Vest, though, on that Kyogre by this point. So Specs versus Assault Vest, the battle of the ages here. And I'm not sure who technically won that one, because the Kyogre did survive, but at what cost, Maeve?
Yeah, that Kyogre, it did hang on, but it has now decided to switch out, bring in Amoonguss. Amoonguss, a great partner for Zacian on the field, having the opportunity to Rage Powder maybe in later turns, go for some Pollen Puffs into your partner, get some HP back up, but not going to be all too helpful if your partner Pokemon Zacian has been knocked out by a Max Geyser in the rain from a Kyogre. So, you know, this Kyogre now going for that Dynamax on Rafa's side, does not want to be locked into that move right now of Thunder that it was in that first turn one, even though that damage was incredibly important. And Zacian, though, actually going for that substitute, which we did see in that last game, and we saw that it was a little bit, you know, it was useful, and it is going to at least be helpful to take something like this Max Geyser, at least waste one turn of this Dynamax, breaking this substitute, and kind of forcing this Kyogre to do way less damage than it may have wanted to. But this Indeedee did not go for Follow Me. Instead, it is going for Expanding Force here into both of these Pokemon. Amoonguss super effective damage because of that poison typing and does well over 50%.
Yeah, that's a really, really solid play there by Rafa. I like that a lot. The Indeedee covers for the Amoonguss switch. It also just covers for the Kyogre staying in. Like, I mean, if it gets the attack into the Kyogre, it's going to go down. The opposing Kyogre is at about 10%. If the Zacian attacks the Indeedee, like, sure, the Amoonguss switching survives, but then the Zacian goes down. So really just a great pin there by Rafa, taking advantage of his position to basically go for a move that doesn't allow Agustín any possible comfortable move of his own.
Yeah, and I mean the Indeedee as well, just making the best use of its Psychic Terrain. If you have this Indeedee and you have the Executor in the back like we have seen, you may want to try and make sure that if your Indeedee goes down, you can get your Executor in time to get that Psychic Seed up. However, Indeedee looks like it's going for that Helping Hand for its partner Pokemon Kyogre. Amoonguss goes for that Rage Powder this turn as well, just trying to prevent this Kyogre from getting any damage onto that all-important Zacian. Zacian going for the Behemoth Blade this turn. There, once again, no Follow Me, so the Zacian free to target into whoever, but the choice was that Indeedee, so no damage onto the Kyogre this turn. Kyogre still sitting here looking incredibly strong, and is going to still be able to do a lot of damage with a Max Hailstorm with Helping Hand into the Amoonguss. So this Amoonguss here able to go down. You do not have to worry about any more Rage Powders, any more Pollen Puffs, and you just get a pretty bulky Pokemon off of the field who can do some big damage with something like a Spore later on in the game.
I'm surprised to see Max Hailstorm come out there. I don't really know what the Helping Hand accomplishes in that situation, but still, overall, you get rid of that Amoonguss, one of the most threatening Pokemon on Agustín's side of the field. You don't want to have to deal with Rage Powder. You don't want to have to deal with Spore. But Agustín still has that Zacian sitting there, and the back Pokemon are Calyrex and Executor. Those are two Pokemon that don't really like facing down a Zacian, and the Kyogre is only got one more turn of Max, and a non-Dynamax Kyogre also doesn't really like staring down Zacian, so Zacian, really the Pokemon that Agustín is going to need to ride down the road to victory if he wants to close this one out.
Yeah, and I mean, here's the thing, right? If Agustín still has that Porygon 2 in the back instead of something like maybe the Incineroar, then Agustín really needs to preserve this Zacian on the field. And it is that Porygon 2, because we saw, you know, the Kyogre has very little HP in the back of Augustín's party. It's only going to be really able to use something like that Origin Pulse to do a lot of damage. However, it's not going to it's going to be in a tough spot because it's you know, it's in a little bit of... Actually, oh my goodness, the Porygon just copied Drizzle and changed the weather from the rain. So that's something that's really interesting as well, that Calyrex not having the opportunity to utilize that hail.
Yeah, that's a little unfortunate here. The Porygon 2, we've already seen that it doesn't really have specially defensive investment at all. It died to a single Water Spout, which should not be possible unless it's running essentially no special defensive investment. So the Kyogre here might just be able to pick it up with a Max Geyser. And of course, there's always the threat of a Max Geyser onto the opposing Zacian as well. We do see the weakness policy on that Calyrex Ice Rider. So is it potentially EV to somehow survive this Behemoth Blade? That's going to be maybe the decisive factor in this game.
Yeah, it is not, though. Absolutely not. That Calyrex is off of the field very, very quickly, but that does mean there's no protect onto that Zacian. If you targeted into that slot with the Zacian with the Max Geyser, you're in a really good spot, but if you go for that Kyogre, it only has 6 HP, and that's a waste of that last turn. But getting Zacian off the field is very, very nice at this point. You now know the last Pokemon on the team are that Kyogre and that Porygon 2. You have Exeggutor, which has the opportunity to go for something like a Sleep Powder. You also have the opportunity for Wood Hammer as well. You know, and if this Porygon is carrying something like Foul Play, like we saw, it's, you know, it's, even though this Exeggutor is a physical Exeggutor, you may be in a better position kind of moving forward. So once again, you are kind of dealing with, I think, a little bit of an interesting piece here, and then you at least still get the Psychic Seed boost from that Exeggutor because it came in just in time, I think, before the Psychic Terrain wraps up.
Okay, so first things first, we need to note that Rafa's Kyogre is locked into Thunder. That's not great for dealing with the opposing Porygon 2. However, there isn't really a max option for Agustín. As soon as that Helping Hand Thunder went down on turn 1, there was no option for maxing, really, because you're forced to max now the Porygon 2. Really, the only Pokemon that Agustín brought to this game that wanted to Dynamax was the Kyogre, and it was immediately put onto about 15% of HP, so you're not going to Dynamax that anyway. Never mind! I'm a liar, apparently. There's a Dynamax Kyogre on our screen right here, right now. Maybe this is the play? Like, does this even survive, though? Like, Thunder is what Rafa's locked into. I don't... Yeah, no.
Yeah.
That just goes down, Maeve. I
was wondering if there was a Max Guard in there hidden on some sort of, like, a secret protect hidden on an Assault Vest Kyogre that was just hiding. Yeah, exactly. However, though, Porygon going for the Eerie Impulse once again, at least able to kind of mitigate the damage from this Kyogre. Exeggutor, though, has the opportunity to go for a Sleep Powder. You put this Porygon to sleep. That still covers for if the Porygon went for the Dynamax as well, which I think is pretty nice to have happen. You still would then be dealing with a Kyogre, but you have the opportunity maybe for it to miss if it went for something like that Origin Pulse or an Ice Beam into your own Exeggutor.
Yeah, at this point, Porygon 2 versus the world, but on the other hand, we have a -2 Kyogre using a non-stab move that can miss when the rain is over, and Exeggutor's physical move does recoil damage to it. I feel like there's a world Porygon can win this on timer. It needs to remove something, and it needs to wake up in like optimal time, but you can already see Rafa playing to the timer, taking as long as humanly possible to do this move, because as long as he gets the timer with 2 Pokemon alive, it's over. Like, the game's done. But yeah, this is going to be wild.
Yeah, but I mean, then, right, if you're dealing with this Porygon 2, we saw that, like you said, it was not particularly especially defensively bulky, so you may still be taking a lot of damage, may not be able to really win on timer here. Kyogre, though, at least with this Thunder, even with the Eerie Impulse, that actually does very little damage. Even, you know, that Porygon 2, not looking too afraid in the face of that. However, Wood Hammer into this Porygon 2, that does, oh my, we're not even at the underside of the 50% of the HP here. So this Porygon 2, I think, really needs to wake up. This is going to be its last turn to maybe get some damage off.
Yeah, this is going to be a big one. If it wakes up, gets the recover off, things are possible. I'm not going to say that I'm particularly optimistic for this Porygon 2, because it does need to remove something from the field before the end of the game. And it also needs to not get crit at any point. But it does not wake up. That's a bit of an unfortunate situation. I believe there's still another turn of rain at the very least, so the Thunder should be able to close this one out. Yes, the rain doesn't end. So unfortunately, not much for the Porygon to do here. We believed a little bit, but it turns out that Rafa has just enough about him with these 2 Pokemon to close out the game.
And what a game it was, honestly. What a weekend. I say weekend, it's only been a day for us, but really, what a crazy day of Pokemon matches. Huge congrats to Spain, of course, for giving us such an interesting match for the wrap-up of our Saturday games. Never a bore, right? Never a bore with the matches that we got to see today. Lots of really interesting dynamics, I think, coming up between a lot of the games. So, you know, just out. I'm still a little bit speechless, I think. But if we want to go back and take a look, kind of at our recap for the day and the matches that we saw, just to give everybody a bit of a reminder, we did have first out of the gate, we had Poland and Taiwan. Both of those teams are both going to be moving on into the next round. Poland is at the top of the group. Then we had Ecuador and the United Kingdom. Both of those teams are actually out. However, it was a great way, I think, to send off both of those players. It was a really interesting game as well. Then we had Australia versus Puerto Rico. Australia has pushed its way in forward, and unless there is some incredibly specific and extreme sets of circumstances, China is most likely also knocked out of that group along with Puerto Rico. Then it was the Netherlands and Vietnam as well. The Netherlands, I believe, also have a pretty good chance to move on, but there is that chance of a three-way tie, if I'm not mistaken. And then for the last group, which you guys just saw, was Spain and Uruguay. And both of those teams are both out, but they were in an incredibly tough group, I believe. So, a crazy game of matches, even though there were players that were at the end of kind of their World Cup 2022 road. They did not slack on delivering us some really interesting games.
Yeah, just a fantastic set of games that we were able to see today. And of course, the week's not over yet. It's just Saturday. And while I will not be here tomorrow, there will be more games for all of you tomorrow. 5 more matches coming up on a Friday to help to determine who is moving on to that top 16. Of course, we will have a bit of a break for the World Championships. But knowing who's going into that top 16 is going to be wild. There we have tomorrow's matches up on screen. Canada versus Switzerland playing off in a very, very close Group 8 that could still go a lot of different ways. Then we have an Italy versus Peru match, which I believe is also very important to decide who will win that group. Both of those two teams have already advanced, sitting on 6 points. But the winner of that will allow themselves to play against, I believe it's going to be the second place of Group 6. So, getting that first seed makes your life theoretically a little bit easier going into the next round. China versus France. China still mathematically in the running, but as you said before, really requiring just an incredible set of results. So, maybe that's a 2-0 for China, which will keep them alive technically. But France has already won that match and has already secured their spot in the top 16 as well. Then at the bottom, we have Mexico versus South Korea. That is the match that will help to determine if there's going to be a 3-way tie in Group 7. So that's arguably the most important match on the entire stream tomorrow. And then to close things out, it's going to be Germany versus Singapore in a match that is important insofar as Germany would like to win to guarantee their spot in top 16. I think Singapore is also still technically alive, actually. So a win for Singapore and a win for Japan will allow Singapore to sneak in second place. So also a match with a lot on the line.
Yeah, so absolutely, you guys do not want to miss what is going on tomorrow. And to make sure that you guys don't miss anything too, keep in mind there are plenty of socials that you can follow. Lots of different ways to keep up with all of the action. The Twitter, the YouTube, the Twitch, the Discord, the website itself will eventually soon in the next, as this group section wraps up, we'll be kind of going and showing that playoff broadcast and the playoff bracket itself. So, there is plenty more World Cup to be played, even though we will be taking a break during the week of the World Championships. However, once the World Championships are done, that does not mean the worldwide Pokemon action stops. So, it's so exciting, and I cannot wait to be able to kind of tune in and watch some of those matches tomorrow. And every single time we get to these end weeks, these ends of the stages of the World Cup, it's so exciting for me because it's fun watching all the players' reactions too and seeing how excited they are for them and their team or their friends. So, or their country even, depending on if they're on the team or not. So, Stefan, I'm just psyched. I hope tomorrow's matches give us just as much fun as today's did.
I do too. I'll of course be watching. So I'm very, very excited to see how that goes. Tomorrow's stream will start at 2 p.m. UTC. I believe that is 2 hours earlier than we started today. So something to note for your calendars if you are planning on watching the whole thing, which you really should be.
Yeah, you absolutely should be. If you're not, I'm surprised. But anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching today. We had an absolute blast. Once again, this has been the Victory Road World Cup of Pokemon VGC. We are very happy to be sponsored and very thankful to be sponsored by Metafi, Elgato, and GG Tour. So You know, you guys, stay tuned. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. UTC will be the last day of broadcast for this last week of the group qualifying stages. So come back here tomorrow.